Well, hello,
And
everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from around the world. I'm Richard Bagnall. I am AMEC's chairman, and I'm the global co-managing partner of a monitoring analytics business called Karma. And it's my great pleasure to introduce and to welcome you to today's session put on by the AMEC European Chapter on one of our Ask the Experts events as part of Measurement Month. AMEC as an association exists to drive better education and best practice of evaluation techniques all around the world. And it's never mattered more than it does today. We really are operating in the age of accountability. And for PR and comms to succeed, we have to be able to prove our value in a meaningful and relevant way. And today's panel of experts are going to be able to give you the information that you need to do that. It's why Measurement Month matters so much. Every year in November, AMEC runs a whole variety of different events. This year we've had over 50 of them. Of course, many of them have been virtual. And for that reason, please go and look at AMEC's website, amecorg.com, and look up the Measurement Month events. And those that you may have missed are all available to watch again on demand. As I say, we've got 50 events plus this year. We've had many of them already. There's still many to come. So go and look at that calendar. Thank you so much to the European chapter for all the great work that they do, and particularly to the leadership, Marianne Morgan, the chair of City Press, and Simon Gabar of Observer. And they'll both be speaking and leading and moderating the event today. We've got a great and diverse panel. We've got Dr. Maya Kaliva, who's head of research and insight at Cometric. We've got Dr. Glenn O'Neill from Auri in Switzerland, and Dr. Martin Loser, who's the MD of Insights at Kantar Media in Germany. So I hope you enjoyed today's session. I'm looking forward to hearing what the panel's got to say and also playing a small part as well. But with that, I'll hand over to Marianne. And again, welcome everybody. Marianne.
thank you so much, Richard. And like Richard says, welcome to our very first European chapter webinar. It's great to have so many of you with us. As Rich said, I'm the European Chapter Chair, and in a moment my colleague Simon is going to introduce you to our amazing panel of experts. But first I thought I'd let you know what you can expect from the next hour. So each of our panelists are going to share their experiences of 2020, and that should definitely be interesting. And then, how that's changed the metrics that they're using in their measurement, or perhaps not. After that, it is a Q&A session. It's an Ask the Expert session, so we will open it up for questions from the floor. I do have some questions that have been pre-submitted, but please use the chat box to submit questions to us, and we'll get through as many of those as possible. It's a really rare opportunity to get so many experts in one place at one time ready to answer your questions, and Richard has very kindly said that he will also answer questions for us. So please do use that chat box. If there are more than we can get through in the hour that we've got, we will try and answer those on email afterwards. So if you ask a question, you will receive an answer. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Simon to introduce our amazing panelists.
Well, thank you, Marianne, and welcome and good afternoon from Vienna. My name is Simon Giebauer. I am AMEC Board Director for 1 year now and Vice Chair of the European Chapter. In my daily job, I'm CCO at Observer, a Vienna-based media intelligence provider. And today I'm very happy to introduce a really exceptional panel of experts in the field of measurement and evaluation. So the speakers of today are, we have Dr. Glenn O'Neill. Glenn is founder and director of Auri, a research and evaluation consultancy based in Geneva, Switzerland. They are also an AMEC associate member. Glenn has been involved in some 100 evaluations and research projects in over 60 countries, mainly for international organizations and NGOs. These evaluations and research projects focused largely on communications, advocacy, and policy influence in a range of sectors. Glenn is also an experienced teacher, facilitator, and trainer in media, communications, advocacy, and evaluation methods, and used for UN agencies, NGOs, universities, and professional associations. Glenn holds a PhD in social research and methodology from the London School of Economics and an executive master's in communications management. Welcome, Glenn. Next, we have Dr. Maya Kaliva. Maya is head of research and insight at Cometric, a London-based consultancy firm for media analytics. Above that, she is a much appreciated AMEC board colleague of mine. Maya has over 10 years of experience in the media measurement and evaluation industry. She has consulted a wide variety of clients in campaign evaluation, competitor benchmarking, setting KPIs, and in shaping measurement programs to provide deeper and more practical insights. In her current role as a head of research and insight at Cometric, she's also involved in the integration of NLP and artificial intelligence-based technologies and new products. Maya holds a PhD from Sofia University. In her doctoral research, she focused on entity-centric content analysis and the application of network analysis to media texts in order to understand stakeholders in broad media conversations on policy issues or controversial topics. And so welcome, Maya. And finally, we have Dr. Martin Löser. He's Managing Director Insights at Kantar. Martin joined Kantar in July 2014. He has over 15 years of industry experience. As a managing director at Kantar, he's primarily responsible for media analysis. And together with his team, he won several AMEC awards, most recently 3 Gold Awards in 2020. And I'm sure we will get back to this later in the discussion. Martin Löser was awarded as one of Germany's top 100 out executives for his commitment to inclusion and diversity. The Out Executive Project makes lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and inter people visible in the working world. Martin also holds a doctorate in empirical communication science from the University of Leipzig in Germany, and previously earned a master's degree in American Studies and Journalism. Martin, very happy to have you in the panel. And yeah, that's it from my side. I'm looking forward to an insightful discussion. I will have an eye on questions in the chat. And so I'm happy to hand over to Marianne. The virtual stage is yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Simon. So as I said at the start, each of our experts are going to share a little bit of their experiences of 2020 and hopefully what they've learned from it and how that affects the metrics that they choose in their reporting. So Maya, you're in the top of my screen. Shall we kick off with you, please?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's great to be in this company. It's my first webinar, so I'm a bit nervous. Bear with me. So I guess I would start with that this year has obviously been different, challenging and disruptive in so many ways. And from my perspective, there are 2 main big trends visible from the early spring on, and communicators and we as their measurement partners needed to fastly adapt. And number 1 is certainly the rise in audience content consumption due to the prolonged lockdowns. And this also included the shift back to more established media sources. And number 2 is the news flow, which is so heavily shaped by stories on COVID-19, on number of cases, death toll, economic effects, scientific advancement, and unfortunately also malicious content, including disinformation, conspiracy theories, and falsehoods. So I was rather focused on the latter, and I think this change in overall news flow made all of the benchmarks based on historic data entirely meaningless, or at least debatable. So any metric that is purely based on, say, counting outputs became incomparable to historic data sets. So any competitor benchmarking needed to now take into account the COVID news flow and how that affects coverage trends and volumes. And that easily translated even simple changes in the way our reports look now. Now there's much more value put on metrics such as message delivery and reputational attributes. And this type of charts even ended up early on in our decks rather than the share of voice chart, which now commonly ends up in the appendix.
That is definitely a major change, isn't it? And Maya didn't mention it there, but she is really well knowledgeable on automation versus human analysis, anything to do with AI. So if you've got any questions around that, please, as I say, pop them in the chat box. Martin, do you want to give us a rundown of what you've seen during 2020?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Most of what Maya said, I can underline. I think what we've also seen is a lot of pressure on our client side. So there's the pressure for speed. We have to be quicker with our information. Clients who even traditionally have had quite extensive reports are willing to have less volume at more speed, but there's also a lot of cost pressure. Especially in the first half of the year, we have seen that many clients were quite uncertain how they will go through the COVID situation. And budgets were quite in danger. So we had to react as well, and I think that's also something that plays into the cards of automation, because we need to have some kind of combination of AI tools and traditional media analysis to cope with the cost pressure, and also with the requirement to have more speed in the analysis, to deliver quicker results, and to also find something that is beyond the typical corona coverage that we see all the time.
Perfect, thank you so much. And I know that, Martin, when we caught up before this session, you very much were talking about how your role at Kantar focuses a lot on client service and providing reports. I think you used a really nice phrase in our catch up around reports that aren't just for filing. So if you've got questions around creating reports that that are not just going to go into the file or be read and deleted, then please put those questions in the chat box for Martin. And then finally, if we head over to Glenn, you're in the bottom corner of my screen.
Okay, thanks, Marianne. No, I mean, I certainly agree with everything the colleagues have said. And what I would add in addition is that when we look at like tracking, I've looked at with clients and organizations, particularly nonprofits, in terms of like tracking offline behavior and online behavior, in terms of, you know, not only reactions to COVID, but what has changed in terms of their behavior. It could be purchasing patterns, it could be, you know, behavior with friends or whatever. What's interesting is that they are looking for ways to be able to do this more often and to be able to track this more. So what we see is that, you know, there have becoming what I would say more inexpensive ways that we can survey audiences, setting up panels, etc. And this has been very useful to sort of track behavior and changes of people and their actions, and also of organizations themselves. And I think in that terms also, yes, the limits on budgets and the pressure on communications is being felt. At the same time, certainly I would say in those organizations working in the health sector and in the non-profit health sector, you know, more budgets are going into COVID-related areas, and thankfully, more budgets are going into monitoring and evaluation, because people also want to see, you know, what are the results of the work that is being done. So I think, you know, the message for communicators is, which I think we can all agree, and AMEC, you know, has been, of course, advocating this for a long time, is really the importance of measurement and evaluation in the tools that the communicators, the professional communicators, need to use. I mean, here we have a panel. Everyone seems to have a PhD, but you don't need a PhD for measurement and evaluation. You know, you need to just have a strategic approach and a way of going about things. And I think that's also a key message that, you know, needs to go out to all the communicators. You know, we need to think about it in advance, of course. Thanks.
That's a great relief, because I don't have a PhD, so I'm glad that I'm still allowed to be part of this.
Yeah, I would encourage you, you know.
So thank you very much for that, Glenn. And I know that a lot of the businesses that I work with will be very pleased to hear that there are ways to survey their audiences and get to the nub there of sort of the outcome or the behavior change without having to spend massive budgets, because that has historically always been a challenge, I think, for businesses.
Exactly. It previously was 10 years ago, huge costs, but now the costs are going down rapidly, I've found.
That sort of links into one of the questions that's come in, actually. It was directed at Maya, but I think it's probably relevant for everybody, which was talking about reputation measurement. So it says, Maya, you mentioned greater focus on reputation measurement. What metrics do you track and what methods do you use? So do you want to start with Maya, and then maybe, Glenn, you can talk us through some of these nice cost-effective ways of measuring?
Well, I guess it all starts from what is the type of organization that we want to measure and track reputationally, because reputation of an organization is very different, being on whether it's a corporate entity or a non-profit or a government body. And of course, the sector, some industries are more heavily regulated, some less. And if the organization is from an industry that is heavily regulated, that likely there are policy issues and topics that are beyond brand, but could would be reputationally critical for any company in that sector. Think regulation of content and social media, or anything that has to do with this field of technology, or any other. I mean, there's so many industries that are affected by this type of industry debates that affect reputation. So it very much depends on the end client, on what's their view of their reputation, the reputational dimensions. Do they want to align their media measurement to rep tracker or to some other primary research data that speaks to reputation? And this would then define the set of metrics. And the metrics would vary. Would always include a degree of sentiment analysis, stratification of stakeholders, and third-party commentators, how they contribute or steer away from reputational messaging, then pull-through of reputational dimensions in earned traditional or social media coverage, aligning with actual messaging. So it would include countless metrics, but it all would depend on the core view of the organization, of their own framework and their own view of how they want to look at their reputation and interpret their reputation.
So there's no one-size-fits-all set of metrics that you're going to put on a client?
No.
Perfect. Glenn, in terms of some of the research that you were talking about, do you want to talk us through how those costs are coming down and how to get to that cost effective?
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, exactly that. What we've seen now is, you know, if we're really looking at trying to get a measure of, you know, how we are doing in a market or with a given audience, as Maya mentioned, and, you know, the traditional reputational measures and companies are relatively expensive. I think what we are seeing is more and more providers offering, for example, panel services. So where, you know, you can set up a panel that can be run over a year or whatever, or you can have access through, you know, putting questions in surveys that go out to large audience at relatively inexpensive. I just was working with a client doing it across 12 European countries, and it was much cheaper than what I could imagine. You know what I mean? We're talking of thousands of euros, not hundreds of thousands. So I think these are some of the methods that are there. I think that the second one is looking at more at the analytical side as to what can be pulled out of the media and social media data that is more predictive in nature. And I think that's an interesting area that I know Maya and the other colleagues, Martin, are probably working on. I'm less of an expert in that area, but I think it's also very interesting in terms of like, okay, when we can't have access directly to an audience, is there data, for example, online search data, which is predictive in a way? And this seems to be the case in many. It has a sort of a sinister, you know, in terms of surveillance, etc. But it's sort of interesting also.
Yeah. So share of search definitely it's a definite buzzword at the moment, isn't it, in terms of measurement? I don't know, guys, have you had experience of that? Are you using that with your clients? Do you think that's the next big thing for measurement?
Yep, that was actually in my notes as one of the kind of metrics that this past, not just this year, but probably since last year started being more and more relevant and interesting to clients. And a lot of the clients I work for are eager to engage with this type of data and see if there's any differences between their share of voice from output in traditional media or earned social mentions, and if this is correlated in a degree to the share of search. So two amazing tools out there other than Google Trends, of course, is our friends from Coverage Book and Answer the Public. So there are so many great tools out there that can help you gather relevant, interesting data that can supplement any analytics program that looks at numbers of items in traditional or social media.
With so many metrics out there, Martin, I'm just thinking about your drive not to have reports that are just going to be filed and have reports that are going to be actually useful to people. With so many metrics out there, so we talked about sentiment, we talked about share of voice, we talked about research data and other aspects of sort of reputation. Is there a magic number of metrics that you can put in a report to make it, or is there a magic metric or a magic formula for getting your report so that it's not going to just go in the bin?
I wish there would be a magic formula. I'm not aware of it. I think it's always helpful to understand in advance who's going to read the report and what is the report being made for. So unfortunately, as you said, there are clients who need it for filing, but most want to work with it. So typically you have two audiences, of which one would be the PR department, the ones who do the communication controlling, and they need the metrics to work with. They need to understand what's going well, how their messages are accepted, how is the sentiment developing, how is their benchmark against the competitors. And the other big group is the C-suite. And typically they don't have the time, and they don't want to become experts to understand the results of a media analysis report. So it's our task to prepare something which both caters to an expert audience and also to the C-suite to understand and to really see that PR adds value to a company or to an institution. So we need to provide metrics which are both understandable and easy for the executives, but also metrics where the PR people can work with and really steer their communication. I personally think that for PR especially, the metrics need to go into some detail so that they see, for example, that their key messages are not working well, or that they target media which really do not react to them, so that they know how to change their communication efforts. Because in the end, it's money that they invest into their strategy, and it should pay out.
So generally, do you normally do that with a two different reports, one for the C-suite, one for the PR teams?
I prefer to structure the report in such a way that the PR team can just cut after the first pages and only hand this over. I think that's the common approach.
Yeah, is that what everybody else is doing as well? One report that can be butchered as they need it.
Sort of. Absolutely agree with everything Martin said, and this is the common trend we're seeing. It's usually two reports effectively, two audiences. And if we talk number of metrics, then I have to say that with in some measurement programs, we track 30, 40 metrics. It doesn't mean we include them all in reporting, and certainly not everything would be included in a report for the leadership. Basically, a short, concise report for the leadership would really need to focus on, I guess, 3 to 4, maximum 5 key metrics that would talk about the outcomes and potential desired impact of communications, and would be more actionable and would be a conversation starter and would help our partners from the communication teams.
Perfect. Glenn, in terms of that, obviously with your focus on outcomes, so we're just talking there about for the C-suite, making sure that reports are focused on outcomes. How do you get to that holy grail of finding the metric that actually will resonate with the C-suite?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, because a lot that might be interesting for the PR colleagues, media colleagues, will not necessarily resonate with the C-suite, and that's really challenging. And I think that you have to really define that at the very start in terms of like, okay, what are the outcomes that we are seeking for this communication activity, and then how is that going to have a contribution to the organization? And that's of course the difficult area. So we could be talking, for example, about, well, we want to see change in this given public. So we have to be able to measure that sort of change. And we have to be able to show to the C-suite, change has happened or change has not happened. This is the contribution it's making. The challenge is, of course, is that we have to find a balance in our outcomes that is both ambitious and realist. Because if we look at academic studies on actual behavior change, for example, in health campaigning, where I've worked before, the actual behavior change can be less than sometimes 1%. So it's really hard to sell that. Whereas in other cases, I've seen health campaigns that say, we're going to get 100% change in this type of behavior, which is impossible to achieve. But that was necessary to sell it internally. But, you know, how can we find that balance to say, well, you know, this is what we want to achieve. This is perhaps what we're going to achieve. So it's also that fear of measurement that actually, in some cases, when we've gone and actually measured, we've found that we were way, way, way below the target that the communicator had imagined, because the communications targets were not really based on any real even comparative study, you know, that exists in existing research or that they could have made prior. So I think that's really the challenge.
Yeah, it's that expectation management piece.
Yeah, we need something ambitious but realist. That's a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. So actually, we've had a question in which links really well to what we're talking about, and I wonder, since we've got you here, Richard, we might be able to draw upon your many years of experience. That made me sound like I think you're old. That's not true. But we're talking about this link between providing the C-suite with we want to provide the C-suite with really good outcomes reports and show that the outcomes, but how do we create the link between what's been generated in terms of PR or comms and the actual outcome? How can we create that believable link?
Well, I think it's about telling a relevant measurement story, isn't it? And the most common words I've said over the 25 years of running measurement businesses, it depends, is the answer. And the answer always is it depends on what you're trying to achieve. So there's a lot of effort and time being spent at the moment on some organizations trying to link attribution through cookie injection and that kind of stuff into content, and trying to use ad tech techniques to say, well, this earned media content created these visits to the website, which turned into this transactional value. I'm somewhat skeptical that that's the answer for a number of reasons. One, I think that it only tells half the story of the earned media, which means the other half that's been missed. What did that do? That's not being included. But more importantly is that many comms efforts, campaigns, etc., are nothing to do with trying to drive people to a website or trying necessarily to try and drive a purchase either. So it misses on that level as well. There are a variety of organizational objectives that comms people are tasked with supporting, and it's all about asking the right questions. It's not about telling, it's not about having a suite of metrics and saying you have to have this, you have to have that. It's not about a proprietary score. It's about asking the people that matter, what is it that you're trying to achieve? What does success look like? What, agreeing in advance, and this is the importance of planning, by the way, agreeing in advance with them, what are realistic targets? Graham's making a great point there about, you know, 1% and 100% as targets of change. What are the realistic targets that we can be expected to achieve with this comms campaign? And then linking those outputs to the outtakes to the outcomes to tell that story. And I think that's a great phrase for people to remember, telling a meaningful measurement story, and that is about putting the different data points and making it relevant to the people that matter, and putting it all together. Great conversation, by the way, guys. I'm loving it.
It's so great to have so many experts in one place to quiz you all. I'm going to go away and do much better reporting after this, I'm sure. So perhaps getting a bit into the nitty-gritty, because I think we've talked a lot about what reporting looks like, what good reporting looks like, what sort of metrics might at a top line level be in there. But I know there are some questions, and I have some submitted that are a bit more specific about particular techniques. So one that's come in on the chat is around causal maps. So we've been asked if so clients are asking for causal maps to show where in the customer journey and how communications activities are influencing a desired outcome or will influence a desired outcome. Have any of you used causal maps in your research designs to date?
Sort of. Just recently had the pleasure to work on a great public health awareness campaign, and there basically we're not talking about a customer journey, but rather a patient pathway, which is effectively the same concept. And the communications activities were designed to speak to that pathway, so it was quite exciting. It didn't look like this the causal map design, more like a funnel type of design, which is less, I guess, made slightly more PowerPoint friendly, to put it this way. But yeah, this is, I think, one of the biggest trends. And this measurement month, we've been talking a lot about this with on other great events. So make sure to check the AMEC website for on-demand videos, because this is the customer journey aspect of measurement has been heavily discussed this month.
Perfect. And I should point out that a lot of the presentations, if you've not been able to view many of the events or attend many of the events live, lots of them are available on demand. So that just because we're coming to the end of measurement month doesn't mean that you've missed your opportunity to
Marianne, I'll pop a link into the chat for people to go to.
Yeah, that'd be perfect, because there are some amazing events, almost more than you can get through in a month. So it's good to have it there. Glenn, were you going to say something around puzzle maps? Glenn or Martin, either of you used them before?
Yeah, I can say that I've used them in a way that often in the development sector, they're called theories of change often. So that what they call the theory of change or intervention logic, they call it also, which basically tries to map out exactly that from the activities right through to the outcomes and the impact, if you like. And what's very good in this, and you can, if you look online, if you just search online, you'll find theories of change, you'll find plenty of examples. But what is very good is it really helps the communicator understand and explain to their client or their bosses, you know, these are the steps that we need to carry out to get to that change in outcome, attitude, behavioral knowledge, and these are the possible influences on it. So it's very helpful in saying, well, actually, look, just holding this event or putting up this website is not going to be enough to get the behavioral change, for example. There are other elements that come in here, and who is going to work on that? Because I'm the communicator, I can work on this and that. So, you know, so it's very good. And it also helps to then understand, okay, what are the other potential influences on the outcomes we want to see? So it's a good process. So, because it also helps to, you know, identify, as we said, some of those metrics and indicators that you want to measure, and perhaps some of the things that are really outside of your control, but are good to know in advance, so that, you know, when you have to show your progress and success, you can say, well, these are some of the factors we identified at the very start we thought were going to have an influence on this process, on this chain, and in fact, yes, they did or they didn't, and I think that's useful also, for sure.
Thanks, Glenn. We've talked a couple of times a little bit about predicting and getting data to predict what's going to happen. I'm guessing none of you predicted COVID and the impact on comms there. But Martin, are you using, is Kantar starting to use predictive analytics as well, or is it still more around looking at what has happened and learning from that data?
Well, of course, we know it's a huge challenge, and that this is one of the core questions that we have to answer in the next years. I think it really depends on what business we are talking about. So there are some areas where let's say, for example, consumer brands, where this is more easily manageable, and other areas, especially everything that's around politics, I think we're still at the very beginning of understanding how we can do something predictive.
Would everybody agree with that sort of line of advance? Anybody else stepping ahead in terms of predictive?
I would say predictive is a lot more complicated than people think. It's one of those big buzzwords at the moment. A lot of effort's gone into it for many, many years, and it's difficult and it's complicated. Why? Because humans are difficult and complicated. We do things for different reasons. We're strange creatures. If you're British and you see a queue, you'll join a queue, because in many ways we act like sheep. But at the same time, I will buy a Honda and you'll buy a Volkswagen, and it's very difficult to really understand all those different reasons that have made those things happen. And even I always thought there's a great example. I decided when I got married and my wife was pregnant that I needed a better car. I wanted to buy an estate car. I decided to buy the second-hand BMW, and I'd identified it in the local garage, the actual model I wanted, and I turned up to buy it. Okay, so I was a customer that had gone through the journey, I'd done the research, found the actual car, turned up to the garage to buy it, and the salesman was very offhand with me and basically pretty rude. I didn't like him. And guess what I did? Not only did I walk out of that garage and didn't buy the car, but I also resolved at that point I'd never buy a BMW again. So how do you factor that into some kind of predictive analytics based on a communications strategy? It's terribly complicated. I do work at the moment with the Government Communications Service and the Cabinet Office Evaluation Council. In our last meeting a few weeks ago, we were asked to review the UK government's spending on COVID-19 communications since March. And a phenomenal number in terms of amounts of pounds have been spent on it. And this was a few weeks ago. I think from memory, it was 482 million pounds. You know, £500 million just on the communications of washing your hands in space and that kind of stuff. And the government was trying to work out, had it been effective? And of course, the elephant in the room was that the effectiveness of that message had been totally undermined by the behavior of key actors in the government, irrespective of the communication strategy and tactics and implementation. So, you know, when you've got people like Dominic Cummings behaving in a certain way and other members of the government and scientific advisors breaking rules and counteracting the communications, to put any kind of prediction against, well, if we were to do this, people would remember that, just goes out of the window. And I think our industry is littered with organizations that have tried to do this and it doesn't work. I can think of some, for example, who've tried to make a business model around predicting share price based on media news. And the reason that doesn't work is it doesn't work. You know, there's always a reason that share price might move differently from what you'd expect from the media relations. You know, there's been many false starts. One day, maybe it will be able to be done, perhaps. Right now, definitely, it's early days.
I think part of me thinks that I'd rather not be able to predict human behaviour because it's much more interesting that way. We've had a couple of questions come in about timings, and actually I think it's a really interesting question. It's a question that comes up quite a lot. So what the first is around, is there a good ratio between how much time you spend generating the value, so doing the work, and how much time you spend reporting on it and measuring it? So I guess that's time or money, budget. Is there a sort of balance to be struck there, or do you have a balance in mind, Martin?
I think one solution can be that one has at least a part of the data aggregated in an automated way, so that to some extent insight can be delivered automatically, which is then almost in real time via the dashboards that are common now. But I think for the real deep dive and for the human analysis, fixed intervals like monthly, I think, is most common, maybe quarterly. These deep dives are still relevant and they are also useful. But I have also seen that clients don't really have the time to read through a 100-page report on a bi-weekly basis. So it's I think a combination of self-service and quick KPIs and the insight reports, which can be discussed with some time.
So I guess you're right. If you've got a 100-page report that nobody's reading, then that balance of time has somehow got a bit wrong. I'm sure years ago I heard somebody say that you should spend like 5% of your budget on measurement. I'm not entirely sure where that's come from. It's pinged into my head. Maya, what do you think of that? Would that feel like the right balance to you?
Actually, yeah, this is the way I understood that question as well. So if you are a PR professional, if you are a communicator, how much time you do your actual PR job and how much time you spend reporting on it. So the investment is not just your budget, but also your time. Yeah. And my answer would be always pick a good measurement partner so that you don't do it all by yourself. And the other part of that question would be, well, if you design your communication strategy in a measurable way, set smart objectives, then the reporting should be streamlined to the degree that you know what kind of data points you need, and you know what to set up in terms of data collection, and that would make a reasonable ratio. We don't need to put a number on this, but of course measurement has to be part of your thinking before you start your communications.
I think,
Thank
Marianne,
you.
that number you were talking about, it comes originally, it was PR Week back in the 1990s did something
Showing
called
my age.
the Proof campaign. And the OO of proof was a percentage sign. I think from memory, actually, they were suggesting it was 10%, but I think a lot of people felt that 10% was probably too much. But 5% of budget feels absolutely right. When you're running campaigns that matter so much, you're doing work that matters so much, you have to spend time measuring its effectiveness as well as checking it's working on an ongoing basis, so that you're not wasting time and resource on things that aren't working. I think that with digital media and the way things have changed, that's been the big change. We're able to get that kind of insight much quicker now.
Yeah, and I guess heading into next year, nobody's going to want to spend on anything unless they can prove some value from it. So it's definitely worth investing in that. Similar question, or another question around spending time, Glenn. I think this this probably is a good one for you, is around, obviously measurement and surveys are becoming relatively inexpensive, but they can take time to configure, analyze the results from, and how, I'll start with you, Glenn, but open to everybody, how are you managing the sort of more time consuming aspect of tasks so that that time balance doesn't get out of whack?
Yeah, no, yeah, I read the question. I think it's a very good one in that, yes, a lot of we can do surveying ourselves very much these days. We can also outsource it, but also if we're looking at internal audiences or audiences that we know that we're in contact with, we're in a network, for example, then it does make sense to do it yourself. I think there's no easy way around it. I think the communicators, have to find the time to do it. Of course, it's a relatively mundane task. So if you have junior colleagues that can do it, all the better once you've just determined what what your questions are, etc. But it comes back to that notion also, I think, that the communicators also have to spend 5% of their time mainly on monitoring, measurement and evaluation tasks, which is not always easy. And given as many communicators, I'm a former communicator, are doers, they want to do things. But as Richard said, we also have to spend time, money and time on monitoring evaluation. So yeah, I think there's no easy solution. I think in terms of like questions and types of questions, there are many examples available publicly. We can look online and find them. Like if we say, okay, we want to have a series of questions on reputation, we can find those very much easily online. And the good thing is that these are questions that have been tested before with thousands of people. So we can build our own sort of questions and metrics that fit our organization, and any communication professional should be able to do that, I think.
So there's always going to be a little bit of heavy lifting required.
Yeah.
Martin, we were talking about sort of combining AI and manual analysis a little bit earlier. How can you use AI to lighten the load of that heavy lifting?
I think we can, and also I think it's quite useful to spend some time to have some investment at the beginning of a measurement journey, because typically once you are willing to sit together, to invest, to prepare in a thoughtful way, this will save some time over the course of the measurement journey. So I think a holistic picture where both parties, the measurement supplier and the PR professionals, they go through the journey together. They know where to invest time, that, for example, for the whole preparation, for the whole design of the analysis, but then the analysis itself will be understood in a better way, and the results will also be more useful. This really touches the AI, because to set up an AI for media analysis sometimes is quite an extensive process, and it takes a lot longer than, let's say, preparing a traditional code book and setting up a coding scheme. But often this investment at the beginning pays out in the end, because you get the quicker results, you get a better analysis, and AI is only as good as the investment that you have at the very beginning.
Maya, I know you've done a lot of work in automation and getting that balance right between automation and human analysis. Is there a magic formula? Is there are there certain tasks that you would never give to give to humans anymore because they can be done better by machines, or what do you think?
Well, if our strategy is to automate through machine learning models or natural language processing, we literally need tons of historic data to use to train good models. And this is the key here. We need to have good data, historic data that can be used to model. We can't just pick something off the shelf. This is highly likely not going to be good enough for your needs. So the human analyst would identify, if you imagine the way a human analyst would read a piece of content and tag. So in one read, the human analyst would identify all coverage topics, reputation drivers, messages delivered, spokespeople or commentators or sentiment. And each of those metrics has to be a separate model in automation. And the more one metric is well described and it's specific and discrete, the more appropriate it is for an algorithmic interpretation and model training. If you have a lot of nuance and a lot of ambivalence in a metric, then it would be hard. I wouldn't say it's entirely impossible to automate, but it surely is quite hard. And it doesn't mean that there has to be a goal to get away without human-led analysis. This is why I would say that we can use a fully automated AI ML-led approach when we need environment scanning and directional data. But for very specific and focused measurement programs, I still strongly recommend human-led analysis to be part of the mix. So it can be aided and supported by models to do the heavy lifting. That would be great. But then the human in the loop, to me, is an absolute must.
So we're all going to stay in a job for a little bit longer.
For a little bit longer, yeah.
There's a question coming in which is actually directed to you, Maya, but I think again is relevant for everybody. And I know we were actually talking about this just before we joined the call, which is around how you incorporate 2020 and everything that happened in 2020 into your reporting. So obviously it's a bit of an outlier as a year, or we hope it is, and it makes it difficult to then compare with previous years. How are you getting over that so that you can show the year-on-year performance, and also so that you'll be able to use this year's data compared to next year's, which we're hoping will be better?
Well, we don't know what means better. The news flow might still be quite high, even if, like, in the world, the pandemic situation, pandemic management is better. So we wouldn't know yet what is going to happen and how it's going to shape up in 12 months' time. I joked in our prep meeting that I've already had some clients request a year-to-date report that is controlled for COVID. I wish we can control for COVID a lot of things. Probably our media reports can be to a degree controlled for COVID, but that's not going to be accurate measurement because COVID is the reality of today's media landscape. We can't just remove your coronavirus mentions from your media coverage. They are there. So we need to put enough emphasis on why this data cannot be directly compared. And shouldn't be used as a KPI. So you can't use your 2019 data as a KPI to 2020 without the necessary caveats. And I think that's the most important point. What will happen in 2021, we're yet to see. But yeah, volumes and trends definitely changed.
So that's a really interesting point actually around KPI setting. So if you are starting work with a new client or a new agency now, how would you set those KPI benchmarks? What would you use as your benchmark for that?
I would go for qualitative benchmarks rather than quantity-based benchmarks, especially if the client is an organization that is somehow a stakeholder in pandemic management and response. And that could be a whole wide range of organizations, including our hosts today, Zoom, for instance. So it could be COVID could be a very integral part of the news flow of an organization, not a side nuisance. So we need to be smart in how to set up the qualitative KPIs, and it would definitely require a lot of consultation with hopefully a lot of openness from the communicators.
Does the rest of the panel agree? Everybody thinking that qualitative might be the way to go, and to embrace what happened this year and just try not to control for it. Is that what everybody else is doing?
Yep.
Absolutely. I think especially as the volumes and reach numbers and so on have changed so much this year, it has become even more important to analyze the qualitative aspects of coverage. For example, at Cantor, we're using something we call the impact score, which we also use to compare different geographies of different sizes. Let's say a small Baltic country and a big Central European country, they will never have the same amount of coverage or the same reach, but this is no information at all whether the quality of the coverage is good or whether the PR objectives have been met. So what we typically look at is to see what the aim of PR is, what their main measures are and mean metrics are, and what they put out to the recipients. And then we check whether this is accepted. And with such a score, then you can see whether the quality has increased or whether the quality is lower. And it doesn't matter whether the total number of articles is higher or lower. And I think this is even more important now because we cannot just compare quantities in over these years. And another aspect that I think has become very relevant this year is to look at the variety of coverage. So many institutions and brands have been reduced to COVID coverage, and we have seen that there is some difference in how companies are able to set different topics or push messages in addition to their COVID coverage. So everybody has to do COVID, but it's very difficult to push other topics, and the success is very mixed.
Thank you. Glenn, a question for you around research and surveys. We talked a lot earlier, excuse me, around quick and easy surveys and sort of the more cost-effective side of gathering that data. But our question here is around clients who are potentially very critical of that, and that they want proof that the correct constructs and attributes are being measured, and are talking about factor analysis. So obviously that will make the measurement much more expensive. Do you feel that factor analysis is a prerequisite for sort of really deep dive behavioral or attitudinal research?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, yeah, factor analysis, it's more a statistical, analytical approach. So for surveying where, you identify a number of factors that could have an influence on the results seen. That could be things like age, could be media used, etc. So I think it's a good point that, like, the first reaction would be, well, if the client is asking for that, then the client should pay for it. So of course, we do have specialists in that can do that in terms of surveying. At the same time, I've done it myself where, we'll use basic factors in terms of like, age, location. And then, it's very easy once you have the survey data is to ask a statistician to do a basic correlation analysis, which gives you the responses for the factor analysis. And, that today I use statisticians that I've found online, and it costs, honestly, you do a survey yourself and then a statistician will charge you 200 euros, to do a correlation analysis. So it is expensive, but there's also ways around it. I think also the other thing is that, yes, you have to have some confidence in your ability in the questions that you're going to ask. You might want to have a statistician check that, but at the same time, there are many models available online, and the best thing is to read case studies about how others have done it. I find that's really useful, particularly when they also publish their questions they've used. And secondly, I would say also we shouldn't, as mentioned, we shouldn't ignore the qualitative element, that sometimes we ignore that sometimes the powerful message is not the statistical analysis, but it's also the powerful story of that individual who has changed because of this, and this is the impact it's had on their life, for example. So I think also that is also quite powerful and needs to complement the more quantitative methods.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Really interesting. We've had the perfect question to end on, which relates to Donald Trump. So with the demise of Donald Trump, do we think
got through the whole hour and we didn't mention Trump?
I know, win. But yeah, just at the last minute, he slipped in there. So with the demise of Donald Trump, do we think fake news is going to be less of a consideration moving forward in our evaluation?
Donald Trump hasn't demised, unfortunately. He may no longer be president, allegedly, from the end of January, assuming that he does allow the removal van access to the White House. But he, you know, the rumors are he's not going anywhere, and the division that has ran amok in America for the last 4 years is likely to continue. I mean, let's not forget he received the most votes in history, with the exception of Joe Biden, who received a few more. But, you know, this man remains popular. It seems he's going to remain trying to maintain a power base. He may well run again in 4 years' time. I would say fake news is going nowhere. That division that he has thrived on is unfortunately, in America at least, not necessarily going anywhere.
Keep us all on our toes for 2021. We have had another question in, but I'm conscious that we're coming to the end of our time. So what I will do is all the panel have been very kind in saying that they will answer questions on email afterwards. So if you did have a question and you didn't get a chance to ask it, or didn't perhaps want to put it down in front of everybody, then please do feel free to post it to us, and we will ensure that you get an answer back, and we'll share those answers with everybody so that we can all benefit and learn from each other. But I think that's everything for us. I'm not sure if you want to say anything to close, Richard.
Well, I will. Okay, yes. Just first of all, thank you, Marianne. I thought that was a great job, and thank you very much to all of the panel for their insights. Thank you, Glenn, Martin, Maya, Simon, and you, Marianne, for threading it all together. Thank you to everyone who joined and attended. All your great questions that you put to the panel as well. You can follow the conversation from Measurement Month online. We use the hashtag AMECMM. I should have said that at the beginning. But if you want to look and see different events being tweeted about, that's where you'll find it, and on LinkedIn as well. I shared into the chat the link for other Measurement Month events. But you know, AMEC is an association that punches above its weight. It has a full-time executive team of basically, well, I say full-time, we don't have a full-time executive team. Our CEO works 4 days a week, and Julie, our manager, works, I think, 3 days a week. And these guys go miles beyond the call of duty to help us to achieve our ambition, which is to raise the tide for all ships in the PR and communications industry to know how to measure in a better and more meaningful way. And we rely on our volunteers. So, you know, again, my thanks to today's panel for their insights and their expertise. For anybody who's an attendee today or watching on demand who's not a member of AMEC, please do join us. You know, we're a friendly, welcoming organization, and we want your we want your input and help us to identify what are the areas that matter. Our big theme for next year is going to be about the importance of linking planning to evaluation, because if you don't have a proper plan, how can you measure in a meaningful way? But on top of that will also be this undercurrent message that we have to, and perhaps this is my last thought, as PR and communications professionals, we all have to up our game. We have to start thinking it's no longer about just counting activity metrics. If we just do stuff, just do activity and just count activity, all we are showing our finance director is that we are a cost center, and cost centers get cut in economic hardship. What we have to do is show that we're generating and creating value for our organization. And that means we can't outsource our thinking, even though we've got some super smart people on this panel and organizations all around the world. What we need is the in-house teams to spend the time to think about it and to help shape, work with their partners. I think we had a good conversation about the importance of working together at the beginning of an evaluation program, but work with your partners to make sure that you can tell that meaningful measurement story. So I wish everyone well. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Marianne, and all the panel. And thank you to everyone for joining us, and stay safe and well. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all.
Thanks.